I quite like the live-action Avatar. I want to be clear about this before I get comments telling me to stop hating on the show. I do quite like it, and they did come up with some great ideas that I do mostly enjoy. However, damn right I think it could be better. Damn right I hope Season 2 will be better, because there are problems within the writing that undermine everything that is good about this show. Undermine it to the point some people don't even notice what's good about this show, and they dismiss the writers as soulless and brainless fools. And that's a bit unfair. There is a lot of good stuff, and in a way it's frustrating because this could have been so good as a show. The fact it hampered itself with some of the structure and the dialogue is a shame. So I want to kind of demonstrate how easily that could have been remedied, how a simple extra edit might be all that's needed. I did that already with episode 1, this is now episode 2, the Kyoshi Island episode. We're going to try and tweak the problems we have to see how it could have been improved, and hopefully that'll all be a worthwhile lesson in story structure and planning. Are you ready? To be clear, this is editing the episode we already have. This is not just rewriting whatever the hell I think might be best. You know, for example, I'm not personally entirely keen on a story where Aang goes to Kyoshi's shrine and she takes over and does all this cool stuff to prove to Aang the importance of fighting. That's not the story I'd have chosen to tell, but who cares what my personal preference is? I'm not the writer on this show, I shouldn't be. This story to do with Kyoshi is what we have, and it could have worked very well. To be fair, I even scored this video a 6 out of 10 in my notes when I first watched it. It's a pretty decent episode as it is, but it could definitely be a lot better, and this is about improving on what we already have as a lesson in editing. So with that in mind, what is the existing idea for this episode? What is the heart of this story? Well, Aang is afraid of his power. In the last episode, he almost blew his friends off a mountain by entering the Avatar state, therefore he's now concerned. He knows he has to master the elements and to fight the Fire Nation, but what if learning better fighting makes him even more dangerous and more destructive to those he cares about and to other innocent people? Aang doesn't want to hurt anyone, he is afraid of his power, and that leaves him a bit paralysed, so he doesn't train, even when Katara encourages him to. He speaks to the past Avatar Kyoshi in the hopes she'll tell him how to control the Avatar state, but she tells him basically it's a good thing, it's a power you can harness, not a danger to suppress. You need to fight and to strike damage to others, Aang. And so Kyoshi takes over and does a lot of cool fighting stuff that showcases power, saves the day, and Aang has learned to try embracing his skills and not run from fighting for what is right. That's fairly solid. It develops his character quite fast in the overall season, but there are only 8 episodes. It's not an arc you do get so clearly in the original show either, but I think when there are 8 episodes, and Aang doesn't have the same time for lots of different stories and different encounters with Zuko, then I think this kind of development does make sense. I like the idea of this great power terrifying the hell out of Aang, and he was so angry and hurt in that moment of grief that he would have wanted to destroy anything. Everything. That is scary. But at the same time, you can't just back out, because the Fire Nation are coming for you regardless. What's so cool about setting this whole arc on Kyoshi Island, a place that has maintained neutrality in the war? Because in the same way, yeah, you can avoid the fights and try your best to keep the peace, and a lot of the time that's a good thing, but sometimes the enemies won't care. Sometimes they will invade Kyoshi Island and quite happily burn it to the ground unless you fight back. All of the people Aang is worried about hurting will be attacked by the Fire Nation unless he stops them. I mean, they already wiped out all of the people he grew up with, so that's pretty cool. The island makes sense to explore that character arc within Aang. Plus it sets up a general arc for this season of Aang visiting all these shrines and being lectured by all these past avatars who tell Aang he needs to do things this way or that way, only for Aang to eventually go, no, I am my own avatar, I'm going to do this my own way. That's an interesting idea at the end of the season. You might not like it, but it's interesting. And so yeah, there is something pretty good in the arc for this episode, but with all that said, what's the problem? Yes, it's the structure and the character arcs, that they could all be clearer. Don't get me wrong, we have a nice central idea that does succinctly weave these different character stories into a loose general theme of when to fight and when to avoid conflict. Suki's mum, Yukari, who seems to be in charge of Kyoshi Island, she doesn't want the Avatar to visit because they want to keep out of the war, they are neutral. Welcoming the Avatar as their guest might attract the Fire Nation to the islands. Yes, it's harsh, but it's safer for her people if the Avatar just stays away. That's a very different Kyoshi Island to the original show. I won't say it's better or worse, just different, and it's interesting, and Sokka generally agrees with this. He begins this episode wanting nothing more to do with Aang. They saved him before, yeah, but their duty is protecting the people of Wolf Cove. Aang's business is his own. They've done enough here.
Our duty is to protect the village like Dad told us to.
Sokka's arc for this episode is basically that Suki changes his mind on this. He then ends the episode 100% on board with Aang and wanting to accompany him on the rest of his journey. He starts out like Yukari and then ends like Katara.
What good is saving Wolf Cove if we don't save the world?
I think this is fine as an arc. There are also some faint ideas to do with his insecurity about being a warrior, and we'll emphasize them a bit more. But generally, I think it just needs to be made clearer for Sokka what it is that changes his mind. Why does he decide to follow Aang 100% at the end of this? And also, where is a moment for him to really show he has changed in that story, to decide to be with Aang? As it is, he kind of just ends the episode still with Aang, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess he must have changed his mind and he's with him now, but you don't really see a clear moment for Sokka to show he believes that now, you know? So that's a simple fix we'll explore later on when we get to it. Katara, unlike Yukari and Sokka, she is the prime example for hope and determination this episode, and wanting to actively try and save the world.
Save the world. Us.
Why not?
She thinks you have to stand up and try, even when it's scary, even when it risks causing harm. She believes this. She encourages Aang to train as a result, encourages Sokka to believe in Aang, and then basically she is right. That's her arc. Yeah, she doesn't particularly change. That doesn't feel like an arc. That's not necessarily a problem for her to lack an arc this episode. You don't always need all of your characters to grow, but it would be nice to have a little more. The closest I think we have to an arc here is the kind of plot development of her becoming a better waterbender thanks to this scroll. Since that's in the script, we're going to try and expand that into more of a character arc later on. And then in terms of Aang, yeah, he has this fear and Kyoshi helps him to confront it, but the problem is that's then Kyoshi doing all of this. She takes over. Aang becomes very passive at the end of this story, not actually getting to showcase what it is he has learned or how he has changed within this, so I just feel like there's an extra beat missing for his character at the end here. A bit after Kyoshi does everything, where Aang can now do something as well, something that might be a conclusion for his character to show how he has grown or for him to make some kind of decision. So those are all the things we're going to focus on for improving this episode. There are other tweaks we will make along the way, and again we could say just improve the dialogue, but that on its own is such a wishy-washy point. Let's go through it all in order, shall we? Let's go through every scene, starting with the opening. Well, starting with me mentioning Wild Anvil first.
Katara, do you hear what you're saying? Us. Save the world.
Wild Anvil!
Why not? Look where we are now. If the
Wild Anvil! Yep, They sponsored this video, they're still here, hopefully they'll stay here. World Anvil is an online tool for building worlds, creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for a whole slew of games. Sleuth isn't the right word, I don't know why I said that. Look, you can do all that, you can plan and write stories, you can do all sorts of different stuff for creative projects. I use it for the world building of my novel because my old system of massive Word documents became far too chaotic. Not only does the ability to create timelines with hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles or a billion other things, not only does that make it so much easier to quickly find the information I need, it also makes it so much easier to plan things out and kind of keep going. Sometimes a blank Word document for world building is very daunting, so having all sorts of tools to help with visualization, to help you figure out what needs planning next, to keep your brain fizzing and unimpeded, because all of the tools are very straightforward and easy to use. That's really important to me. It's like the sharper an artist's pencils, the freer they are to focus on the art. World Anvil is a very sharp pencil. You can create mind maps, you can rearrange elements of your story, do all sorts of campaign related things for that sleuth of games I mentioned. Yes, link in the description and as a pinned comment should you desire a 51% discount on all their subscriptions, or if you're not yet sure, then try out the free version for as long as you like. That's what I did at first, and now look where I am, shouting their name at you through a screen. World Anvil! I really like how this episode opens. Zuko is having a tantrum because Aang stole his notebook. It shows us his anger, it shows us he is still a reckless teenager, and you get a good dynamic between him and Iroh here. You feel their character, you feel a sense of chemistry. Not only is Iroh the kind of bumbling foil to Zuko, but he takes on a parental advisory role as well. It wasn't Zuko's notebook that found the Avatar, it was Zuko himself, so he should trust himself to be able to find him again.
It is precisely because we are in a more quiet part of the world that we have an advantage.
Iroh suggests there aren't many places to hide in this part of the world, so they look at a map, cut to Aang also looking at the map discussing Kyoshi Island. Yeah, that's pretty solid. You could nitpick and call it a plot hole to just conclude Aang must have gone to Kyoshi Island. It's a bit of a convenient leap in logic. I'm not altogether sold on the idea of the notebook to begin with, but the scene makes a clear point, it's concise, it shows character, it gets the ball rolling. But it's in that cut to Aang looking at the map saying he wants to visit Kyoshi Islands, that's where we get the problem. He wants to go there in the hopes something at her shrine will help him control the Avatar state.
Before
You kill someone?
it happens again.
Not a bad moment of humour exactly, but the problem is this isn't enough to express Aang's central fear for this entire episode. Yeah, we saw him almost blow them off the mountain last episode, but the story didn't highlight the danger of that from Aang's perspective. We didn't really see him feeling guilty and afraid, like, oh my god, I almost killed you, you know? So I just think we need a quick beat to feel Aang's fear now as the setup for this episode. Not just be told it by Sokka, but feel it. And there are many ways you could do that. My perhaps uncreative but at least concise example would be a dream. Super quick images, you know, they are all asleep at the Southern Air Temple, I think it's fine for them to rest the night there. Aang has a nightmare where he sees Sokka and Katara getting blown off the mountain or some other similar danger. He is terrified by how monstrous the Avatar state appears. A simple flash of imagery there and then he wakes up. Now we've got it, now it's super clear. And in my version this would now be early morning, him waking up causes Katara to stir, who then asks Aang if he's okay. And Aang can ask her if she was scared when he was in the Avatar state. I think she would admit she was, but that it's okay. You know, just a couple of lines of dialogue where he expresses his fear about how angry he became, and she reassures him that, of course he was angry, he just found out what happened to all of his people, of course he lost control in that moment, but she's sure it won't happen like that again. And you can end on a close-up of Aang saying that she's probably right, but he looks uncertain and afraid as though his face is saying, but what if it does happen again? That kind of conversation, something to reaffirm the fear we are going to explore, to link back to the grief from last episode, and for a nice bit of chemistry where Katara gets to show her caring side. Just a simple moment of comfort and reassurance that doesn't entirely convince Aang. I think we really need a beat like this at the beginning, but it does now mean we have a bit before Aang can look at this map and say we need to go to Kyoshi Island, which means this scene now needs to happen before the Zuko one where they stare at the map. That is a little bit of a problem. As it is, we now have this scene as the opening, then Zuko and Iroh have their moment, and then they look at their map, and then it cuts back to Aang looking at this. I don't think that flows quite as well, but I'm not going to get bogged down in trying to present something perfect here. This is just my random example to highlight that we do need an extra character beat, however it might look. He wants to go to Kyoshi Island to see if her shrine can help him. Fine. In the show though, this scene continues on. Aang walks off into the background while Sokka and Katara now talk. Sokka says it's time to go home. They saved Aang from captivity, great, but their duty is to protect Wolf Cove now. Katara says no, Aang is more important than that. This is about saving the world, they have to stick by him. Sokka kind of rolls his eyes at the idea of saving the world, and you can sense a little bit of conflict. Generally, again, this is fine. It sets up both of their starting points for this story. As for pretty much all the scenes, we can say the dialogue could be better, but I don't need to say that. You know that already. Just saying make it better doesn't really mean anything, and we're more focused on the bigger picture than the specifics of the dialogue. This sets up what their character starting points are. We get a slight sense of sibling dynamic from them, which is pretty good. Aang spots the backpack moving. Momo is inside, and then Katara also notices a waterbending scroll is inside, and it's quite an abrupt, here's a thing for you, Katara, and here's a gimmick for you, Aang. Neither of those things really getting to mean as much as they should do here. The waterbending scroll, the fact it's there is Katara's argument for why Sokka should stick with them a little longer. She's like, look, I would never have found this if we stayed in Wolf Cove, which feels like a little bit of a flimsy argument to persuade Sokka. After that, they prepare to leave, but Aang says there's something he has to do first, which is a quick moment of burying Gyatso before they fly off. All of this could flow better and mean more. How exactly you refine this seems quite straightforward to me, I think. One, remove the waterbending scroll entirely. I don't think it works here. I have a better idea for where it could go in the script later on, we'll come to that. Two, don't find Momo in a backpack. Just have Aang going to bury Gyatso. Make that a slightly longer moment and more of an actual character beat. Aang is sad and he says to the grave about Gyatso being someone who always looked out for Aang. But you can then either have a quick shot of Gyatso once sharing a bit of wisdom with Aang, like a flashback of him, or just have Aang reciting some of Gyatso's wisdom. The point of that is Gyatso telling and teaching Aang about the importance for an airbender to seek peace, to resolve conflict without violence when necessary. The monks do seem to have quite a pacifist philosophy, and when Aang's entire arc this episode is all about him fearing just how violent he could be, then use that. Gyatso's wisdom about avoiding harm could be more fuel to Aang's fear. Appa walks up and makes a noise as this is happening. Remember Appa? He goes missing quite a bit in this show. He can pop up and do something and make Aang laugh a little through his tears and then say, "We're all that's left of this place now." That's the moment for Momo to appear. That's the moment to take him in as a pet, when Momo gets to express the idea of Aang's home, of being a part of Aang's past, his culture. Momo becoming a symbol for that. That makes burying Gyatso more of a character beat than just something to quickly do before leaving. Momo now means something more than a gimmick. We've better expressed Aang's fear. The only thing that's left to do is persuade Sokka to at least stick with Aang a little longer. I don't think a waterbending scroll is a good persuasion. I think use the grief. As this burial is happening, Katara can whisper to Sokka that Aang needs people right now. They can't just abandon him after he's just discovered what's happened to all his people, you know? She says at least go as far as Kyoshi Island. If that's a whole island dedicated to Avatar Kyoshi, then maybe they'll have people there that can help Aang, and they can kind of pass Aang on to them. At least go as far as that, and then maybe head home. Obviously Katara wants to go a lot further, but this is enough of a thing to persuade Sokka to stick with them for now. It's also making use of that grief again. Yeah, with all of that done, the episode is set up now. The scene can end with them flying off to Kyoshi Island. We can cut all this stuff on Oppa where they talk about Momo probably tasting like chicken, because I don't think that moment of humour translates into this show as well as it worked in the original. I think it just feels out of place here. This scene doesn't contribute much. Let's just get to the island. First, Zuko and Iroh are at the market, searching for information about the Avatar's whereabouts, and I quite like this scene. It's not technically developing much, but they get moments to express their personality within the script. The show isn't often the best at this stuff, so it is nice to see it here. The humour suits the tone much better. It's pretty good. I like Iroh stressing the importance of how they can use tact and subtlety and wit to find information without revealing any of their own. The only thing I realise here is that Zuko doesn't have enough arc in this episode. You know, if you look at it all, he's angry about losing his notebook, so he then does everything Iroh suggests, which causes Zhao to get the upper hand, so Zuko hurries after them, but basically Zhao is doing everything now until they have to retreat, and then so does Zuko, and Zhao elects Zuko to be the leader of their hunt, but it's a trick. You just realise Zuko doesn't get that much agency of his own here. Doesn't feel like he's getting to do much and have much of his own impact, so I think what I'd do is emphasize that for now. Yeah, make it clear Iroh is the one taking the lead at this moment. They're trying things his way, these ideas of subtlety, despite Zuko's slight annoyance at it. Therefore, when this tactic goes wrong later on, and Zhao does get the upper hand as a result, Zuko can go, right, forget that, we're doing it my way now, uncle. We can then have a bigger moment for Zuko at the end to do things how he wants to do them. And I know exactly how that's going to look, and I think it's a pretty good idea. We'll get to that later. So the gang arrive at Kyoshi Island and are immediately captured. Fine. I'm not sold on the glowing shrine eyes and stuff, but it gets them quickly to this scene in the hall with Zuki's mum, Yukari, where she tells them that they can't have the Avatar on the island. It might attract the Fire Nation. She's sorry, but she has to do what's best for her people. I like that moment. What I don't like is the response. Aang makes a big speech about the need to help each other, a speech that doesn't sound like a 12-year-old boy. Then Suki whispers to her mum for ages, trying to convince her, and they have a bit of exposition, and then eventually Yukari says, fine, you can stay 48 hours. What bothers me is that I think we're robbed of a golden opportunity for Katara to be Katara right now. Remember her personality from the original show? Remember how passionate she could be? Wanting to make a difference, wanting to stand up for what's right, not afraid to tell anyone exactly what she thinks, to try and rouse people into action or calm them from reckless behaviour, or sometimes scold people a bit like a mum. Where is Katara's passion here? You know, she doesn't have to be the same character as the original show. I'm perfectly fine that they've changed Zhao and various other people, but Katara's starting point this episode was all about impressing on Sokka that they need to stick with Aang because saving the world matters. We can't shirk away from that. So within that context, why the hell isn't she speaking up now, trying to make that similar point to Yukari? Aang is the last hope against the Fire Nation. If we don't help him, what hope is there, you know? She should be standing up and saying that, perhaps saying it with a little too much passion, bordering bordering on the point of insulting Yukari, at which Aang can then step in being more diplomatic and be like, Katara, it's fine. Aang understands Yukari's perspective. He doesn't want to hurt anyone or cause them danger. They only came here to find answers about the Avatar state. If they can do that quickly, they can move on again. He seeks a compromise and suggests what if they only stayed a week? 3 days? Yukari then answers 48 hours. Fine. That's the agreement. That's how this scene ends. You see how easily you can work the individual characters into this scene? Who Yukari is, who Aang is, and who Katara is. The only thing we're missing right now is Suki. Doing this scene my way means we're having to cut all of her whispering with Yukari, but that's fine. I think all you need is to offer some close-ups on Suki's expression while Katara is making her passionate speech. You can show in Suki's expression that she agrees with Katara, but that she doesn't want to speak up against her mum. That's all we need. We can then cut to the next scene, which is all of them walking away from this meeting. Sokka goes to try and speak with Suki because I guess he finds her attractive, and he also sees her as the guardian of this village, his likeness, so he wants to feel more like that himself. He talks to her, mistakenly thinking that Suki agrees with her mum, and talking up that perspective in hopes that endears him to her.
I know why you wanted us off your island. I'd have done the same thing. I'm the guardian of my village too, so.
This is arguably the best scene of dialogue this show has to offer. I do quite like it. The setup of Sokka trying to impress Suki but completely misunderstanding her perspective, trying to mask his own insecurities through his boasting that Suki then sees through. It gives space for Sokka to be Sokka, and when Suki questions him, he is forced to end up arguing the exact points Katara was using against him earlier, arguing the exact opposite to what he's believed.
How are you protecting your people if you're here?
What? I'm not. I mean, I am. I have to save the world first. Katara, how does it go again? I'm protecting Aang, so I'm protecting...
This works well. The next scene is Iroh and Zuko meeting Commander Zhao in the hopes of obtaining local maps. Zhao is a much more slimy, devious character than he is in the original show. I don't know which Zhao I prefer out of the two. Comparing them isn't the point, you know. He's different here, but I quite like him. He's interesting. Again, I don't like much of the dialogue, but the only big thing I think to change is Iroh's lie. Iroh previously talked up using tact and wit to extract information without revealing anything yourself, and then he comes out with the lie that he wants maps so that they can hunt shark squids for delicacy.
We're hoping to track schools of jumping shark squids. They're delicious, grilled with a touch of lemon.
Like, I get that's the comedy of this moment, how pathetic the lie is, but come on. We could make Iroh a bit more adept than that. Make the lie at least reasonably convincing. As it is, it's so obvious Zhao is going to see through it, and you kind of remove the tension as a result. You just know Zhao is going to find out rather than wondering, oh, is this going to work? I don't know, I'm on the edge of my seat. So I think anything would be better than the shark squids lie. You could do the thing from the original show, where Zhao already knows they're hunting the Avatar. It's common knowledge in the Fire Nation, but he thinks it's a hopeless pursuit, and Iroh and Zuko are just pretending that they haven't found any evidence of the Avatar yet. Or you could just come up with another lie instead of shark squids, or you could make it all a bit subtler. Instead of charging in and asking for maps, you just have Iroh drop in like it's a simple friendly visit from one Fire Nation commander to another. Seeing as they were in the area, wanting to share tea with Zhao and hear tales and gossip and some stuff from all of the men, just for the simple sake of sharing stories. Perhaps don't even mention needing maps, you know, that kind of goes against the fact they began this episode looking at a map and puzzling out where Aang might be. Just have Iroh play it like they want stories and have that leading towards some information. You can have a tension in the scene of the two of them trying to figure out things from the other. And yeah, ends with the same idea that if they give Zhao until the morning, he might be able to come up with something useful for them. Next is this scene. I think just cut it adds nothing, it's kind of weird. I even think it denies Suki any form of an arc in her relationship with Sokka. I much prefer the idea that she isn't initially impressed with him. Sokka just seems like an egocentric, bragging idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about. That's what their first encounter was already suggesting. This moment of her staring at him kind of goes against that and makes their bond feel like it's just that she thinks he looks good topless. If you remember though, I earlier cut the scene of Katara finding this waterbending scroll in her bag that Gran hid there. I need to do something different to introduce that scroll. In many ways, this is a bad idea. I'm not sold on it myself, but I'm gonna chuck it out here anyway regardless. I think, what if Katara finds the water scroll on this island, going through their archives? The water scroll makes more sense coming from the water tribe, sure, but Katara can be excited about it finding it here. She can learn better waterbending. This could help fight the Fire Nation. She wants Aang to be excited too, but he's not that interested, despite the fact he needs to master all 4 elements. That's weird. What's his reluctance here? They've just finished poring over one big section of these archives now, so why not take a break to practice this waterbending move? She thinks it'd be worth giving it a go, but Aang says no, she should go and try it, but he's gonna stay here. Maybe he'll even meditate or something. Then a girl from the island comes in and wants to see Aang's airbending, and then there are other villagers huddling outside the door in anticipation, so Aang, who has seemed troubled, is now keen for this distraction. He indulges them. Katara points out that Aang hasn't yet once tried waterbending at all, but he doesn't really hear now. He's focusing on entertaining this new crowd of people, so she goes off a bit annoyed. Fine, she'll practice the waterbending on her own. By the way, I'm going to jump in and interrupt myself to point out that in the show, this scene with the archives doesn't happen until way later on. It comes pretty late into the episode, which is a real problem for the narrative. The whole reason for them coming to this island was to find answers about Avatar Kyoshi. When you don't then show the characters actually trying to do that until late on, it makes a load of this story feel like dead weight. Especially when the story has Katara being complicit in Aang wasting a load of time, her enjoying that, because that feels contrary to her wanting him to practice waterbending and Aang wanting to avoid it. Like you're lessening the character conflict between them that the episode sets up for no reason. So we're going to pop in an early version of this scene here. After the town hall meeting, Aang and Katara went straight here to look for answers. There's lots to read. In one long sitting they've gone through a load and not found anything yet but this waterbending scroll. Also, why is Sokka not here then if they've gone to look for answers? Good question. Before Katara and Aang go off to the archives, I'd pop in a quick, discreet conversation between Sokka and Katara where he's like, well, we've dropped him off here now, we should be looking to find a way home. And she's like, no, it's important to help Aang. She says that Sokka knows that really, but he disagrees and he says he's not going to waste a day reading old books when he should be protecting Wolf Cove or should be finding a way back to Wolf Cove. So Katara says fine, he can do whatever he wants. If he's so keen to be the Great Protector, he should learn from the Kyoshi warriors, and it can end with him calling after her saying he doesn't need to learn, he's already a good warrior, or something. Are you confused? Basically we're doing 3 things. One is creating space for the next beats in Aang's character arc. He has this fear about his power, so they come to Kyoshi Island for answers, yes. Have them get searching straight away so that we can then see him start to procrastinate. All this pressure to find ways to control his power, to learn from a ferocious past avatar that feels nothing like him, to dwell on such serious, heavy responsibilities and fears. No! Much easier to just go off and have fun with the other kids for a bit. That is a beat this episode hits, but because it's not contrasted against what he's supposed to be doing, you don't really notice any procrastination in Aang. It doesn't feel like it, so hopefully doing this here will resolve that. 2, we are setting up an arc for Katara to do with waterbending. It's quite a weak arc, admittedly, but I was trying to work with what is already here, which is that she wants to learn waterbending to fight the Fire Nation and help save the world and la-di-da. So she learns this new move, and then later on she encounters Zuko and discovers that one simple waterbending move from one scroll isn't enough to fight against someone highly trained, and it kind of reframes some of her optimism about fighting back as slightly naive. Kind of shows the opposite side of this argument to do with fighting and danger and avoiding things, you know? And therefore we can end the episode with her going, okay, we need a waterbending master to teach us. That's really important for later episodes. So we're setting that up here with her finding the scroll, and 3 is this slight difference between Katara and Sokka. It's a mild sibling disagreement, not a heated fallout or anything. He just goes off to do his own thing now, and I think that opens up space to begin his little arc of learning maybe I'm not meant to be at Wolf Cove. Maybe I should be protecting Aang, if anyone. Yeah. All of those 3 points done via conflict in this scene. You can then have a quick shot of Katara by the water, trying to focus on the scroll, but getting distracted because she can now hear the villagers laughing and calling for Aang in the distance. She can hear this stuff going on, and she's annoyed and trying to focus. What this also means is that we can cut this whole long scene where they eat at the table, and then Aang entertains the villagers then. Sokka and Katara talk about him doing that. Suki and Yukari talk about him doing that. A lot of talking. We don't need this stuff. Just a simple shot of Katara trying to concentrate on her training, hearing Aang doing that in the background, maybe even then cut to a brief shot of seeing Aang being the entertainer. That contrast in itself is strong. After that, I think we even go to a shot of Sokka training in the woods as well. He can hear Aang in the distance too, but he's trying to focus, and then Suki appears, and it's the same setup again as this scene. Sokka trying to seem like an impressive warrior, bragging, whilst Suki relishes the chance to show him up. I am changing the way this show's version of Suki works slightly. In a way that's a shame, because they make her someone who's a bit awkward and quiet. Someone who knows how to fight but not how to interact exactly. Her showing Sokka up she hopes will impress him, only it instead makes him feel belittled and he stalks off in silence. I think that is an interesting change to her character. I don't mind that itself. I think that could be okay, but I think it does diminish Sokka's arc. I think it means less to him when he later goes to her and asks to be trained, so I think just have Suki not be impressed by Sokka. Just have her think he's an idiot who's full of bragging and she enjoys getting to show him up for that sake. Then, when Sokka asks for her to train him with humility, it shows a different side to him. It shows that Suki misjudged him and there is a side of Sokka that she can connect with. I think that's a clearer development. But yeah, we've then got Zhao learning very quickly from a soldier that Zuko is hunting the Avatar. Technically that scene comes before this one, but I think it works better rhythm-wise if it comes after, because then you can have the scenes of both Katara and Sokka trying to train whilst Aang neglects his duties. Having them next to each other makes this contrast clearer, but yeah, Zhao learns the thing. The next scene is now this one in the library where they're poring over Kyoshi's old stuff for a way to control the Avatar state. I've sort of ruined this setup by having an earlier scene already take place here. It feels weird to go back again, especially after a mild conflict between Aang and Katara. We are really lacking conflict this episode. It's our first chance for the gang to really be a gang and for these different personalities to start to figure each other out. I think we need them to butt heads a bit to make sense of each other. So what I would do is move this scene to the evening at their sleeping quarters. Katara has finished her practice at the waterbending move for now. She's come back to the room. Aang is there. She tells him practice went great. Aang should have come along. She asks if he got anything done, with a very faint bite to it, and he says no, he couldn't find anything more in the archives. She asked if he actually looked anymore. It didn't seem like he was trying particularly hard. A slight bit of criticism that can make Aang slightly defensive. He says it's fine, he just got a bit distracted by the people is all. They were given 48 hours though, they can come back and look again tomorrow. He's sorry he didn't train, but they've still got time. Some kind of point along those lines, you know, you don't need to make this a huge argument. I actually think instead of building this into an argument, Katara would speak with empathy and care and say that she gets Aang's reluctance. She gets that he's afraid of hurting people again, of that only being worse if he becomes a more skilled bender, but he can't just avoid it. He is the Avatar, he has a responsibility. Aang says he knows. It was just nice to feel like a kid again for a bit. To just play around. But he accepts Katara is probably right. He says they'll get up early in the morning and search again first thing. And if there's time after that, he promises that he'll even try waterbending. And then everybody goes to bed. Oh, also, Sokka should probably be in this scene. He needs more time to bond with Aang too. In fact, particularly him, because he's the one who's been reluctant. The episode, as it is, doesn't really offer any space for him and Aang to talk, so I think he's in the room here too. Before Katara enters, there's just a quick moment where Sokka asks Aang if he has found anyone to help him yet. And then he can say that the Kyoshi warriors seem pretty ferocious. They'd do a good job of helping to protect Aang if Zuko ever came back. You know, half hinting at Sokka's insecurity about Suki being a better fighter than him, but also hinting about passing Aang on. And Aang can just be like, what are you talking about? You did a great job yourself standing up to Zuko and helping me escape from his ship. And Sokka can be like, oh yeah, I suppose I did. Leaning into the compliment and leaving the door open for Aang to make some simple comment about being glad he's got him and Katara here. With a shot on Sokka's face to show, yeah, he does quite like Aang and it would be sad to leave him behind. And if that all feels too contrived, then even just a simple 2 lines of dialogue with Sokka and Aang connect about something with a shot to show Sokka appreciating him. That would be enough. In a lot of ways, I personally am not too keen on a Sokka being reluctant this episode to commit to a journey with Aang, but that's what the episode is, so I think let's build on that and actually make it more of a thing and see his development clearly change. But yeah, then everybody goes to bed. I'm slowing the pace here. I think this is the right moment to let Aang ruminate on his feelings. I think we've also earned a moment for the two of them to talk a bit like this, instead of just out of nowhere Aang opening up that he's afraid of hurting people and Katara comforting that with exposition. I think it's more natural here because we've already seen the problems in their behaviour. Seen Aang being reluctant and Katara being bothered by it. Therefore, that now builds into a moment of them confronting that problem, you know? It just seems such an obvious conflict that is so nearly there in this episode. From here, though, we are starting to head into areas where the arcs reach their climax and the story converges. We can have a slow moment to ruminate on Aang's feelings, but the Fire Nation are coming up to an attack on Kyoshi Island. They bring danger, so let's explore that. We next get a scene at the beach where Zuko notices Zhao's boat has gone, only for a convenient man to explain in stilted delivery that Zhao left in search of a flying cow. Zuko panics. Zhao must know about the Avatar, they need to set sail and get to Kyoshi Island before Zhao does. I think the idea is okay at its core, but we need to make more out of this for it to land properly. Personally, I'd have Zhao's boat not gone yet, but that it's clearly boarding with a lot of supplies and troops, and Zuko is suspicious about that, where he then grabs this convenient guy and aggressively asks him if he knows anything about this. Zhao is heading to Kyoshi Island. Zhao must know. Zuko is panicked. Iroh then can tell him it's okay, they still have time. Zhao isn't going to leave until he's properly prepared to fight the Avatar. Zhao might not even know he's a child, he might be expecting something more dangerous. Iroh thinks they should too take a moment to pause and come up with a plan. He starts to make a similar point he did earlier about requiring subtlety and wits, but Zuko cuts him off. Zuko is annoyed now. They've already tried doing things Iroh's way and it didn't work. All it did is give Zhao the upper hand, so no. They're doing things Zuko's way now. They're wasting no time. They're gonna set sail immediately and get to the island first. That isn't changing much, but it's just better emphasizing the character conflict that's already half there. And if you make Zuko's panic feel clear enough in this moment, then you don't need this later scene of him being annoyed that the ship isn't going faster and launching into a Shakespearean soliloquy about it.
3 years. 3 years.
So yeah, he panics, he's a bit annoyed that his uncle's plan didn't come off, they set sail for the island. Next is Suki with her warriors and Sokka coming in and asking to be trained. I've kind of already explained this one. Have Suki a little suspicious at first, and then Sokka asks for her help with total humility, and that endears Suki to him now, so she then agrees. Simple. You know, I know there's going to be a lot of comments complaining that the show cut Sokka's sexism from the original show. Yeah, I quite liked that arc too, Sokka learning to not be sexist, but I honestly don't care they cut it. I think this could still be fine without it. At its core, that sexism was always about Sokka's own insecurity, to do with not being a proper warrior like his dad and wanting to feel more like a man. So that insecurity itself is the bit this show is zeroing in on. Not the sexism that was kind of a symptom of it, I guess you could say, but the root, the insecurity. If they'd executed that arc to do with insecurity a bit better in this show, I honestly don't think it would have mattered. I'm sure people are doubly annoyed because they're used to that narrative of woke Hollywood ruining old IP and whatever else. Like, yeah, we know there are examples of executives pandering to their audience in a shallow way that has actively harmed the stories they're telling, but I don't think this is an example of that. I don't think it necessarily needs to harm the story at all. I don't think we need to get lost in a narrative here. I think it's just that they didn't quite execute the arc properly that they had instead. We cut away to Aang and Katara in the archives again. They can't find anything of use, it's frustrating. One of them makes some comment about if only they could talk to Kyoshi, to which the other suggests they could try going to her shrine. Maybe that's a bit forced, but whatever, they go to her shrine. Then you can cut back to Sokka training, and he's now getting the hang of it. If you wanted, you could have a moment of Sokka admitting he's not really a warrior, and Suki giving him a bit of a pep talk in better dialogue than we get here. Or you could just not have that at all. You could have Suki compliment him as a fast learner. He might not be the most skilled fighter yet, but he has determination and the humility to see when he needs to learn. Or you could not even do that either. You don't necessarily need any of that. The training itself, I think, is clear enough now we've set up the arc leading into this. And I've already cut all of the other bits where Suki talks flimsily about wanting to see the world. That just feels like a weak arc for her in this episode, so I've cut it. I don't think we need to hear that here. You can keep the romance if you wanted. You could even keep the dumb line with the bells.
The bell.
You hear it too?
We have to go.
It is pretty dumb and cheesy, but I do quite like it. It did make me laugh. Oh, the only other thing I almost forgot is Suki contributing to Sokka's change of opinion. I think via her teaching of this fighting style, she can talk of Kyoshi, talk of her brilliance, and whatever story from the lore of just how effectively Kyoshi stood up against injustice and made a difference. You know, like maybe Aang could do too, Sokka. Like maybe the idea of saving the world isn't just something to roll your eyes at, not when it's the Avatar. Just have Suki talk very naturally of Kyoshi and her achievements, and have Sokka stare at a painting of her and seem in thought about it. I don't know if that's enough for his change, but it's something. The next scene is Aang and Katara at the shrine. They can't find any engravings or writing on the shrine that would help. Katara hears distant bells and wonders what that's about, but Aang has the feeling he should meditate at this shrine. They read something about the spirits of past avatars, right? Aang thinks it's worth trying, so he does, and he enters the spirit world, and there is Kyoshi. We're changing the structure here again as well. Instead of a bit of Sokka training before Aang entering the spirit spirit world, then seeing Zuko heading this way before more soccer training, and only then we hear the bells and the Fire Nation approach. Because that kills its own pace. Once you start ramping up the Fire Nation heading this way, don't stunt it with more of Sokka and Suki peacefully training. So 1, Sokka asks Suki for help and they train. 2, Aang and Katara decide to go to the shrine. 3, Sokka trains but then we hear the bells. 4, Katara can hear the bells distantly but Aang is now in the spirit world. And 5, the Fire Nation are here. You see how there's much more urgency that way? Also the fact Katara doesn't know what these distant bells of the town mean adds a sense of danger, the sense she may be taken unaware by the Fire Nation whilst Aang is stuck in the spirit world. Instead of the dead scene of Zuko just on his ship waiting, have him landing on the island ahead of Zhao. In my version, he gets there first and he stresses to his men that they need to be quick. If Zhao gets here before they catch the Avatar, then he might try to steal their glory. And then what the show does is basically have 3 things running at the same time. 1 is Aang talking with Kyoshi. 2 is Zhao's men, although it'll be Zuko's in my version, but them talking with Yukari and threatening violence and then a fight breaking out. And 3 is Katara trying to wake Aang from the spirit world when she realises that the Fire Nation are here, and then having to defend him from Zuko. The show cuts between those 3 things happening at once, and I think it's pretty good. The cuts create a sense of tension as the plot lines converge until out explodes Kyoshi and blows everything apart. Yeah, I think there's a good structure and a good pace in that. I think keep all of that. It's a good idea. We can certainly make Aang's conversation a hell of a lot shorter. Most of their dialogue can be trimmed, but the crux of this is good. Kyoshi was this super aggressive fight-ready avatar, and she stresses the need for Aang to be like that. To stop letting his fear stifle him. If he doesn't fight back, it'll be Sozin at the Air Temple all over again. Here's the big change though. Zuko is the one facing Yukari. He's much more likely to just shout and demand and make impatient threats than Zhao does in this scene. And I think what we've seen of Yukari before, with the little space she's had in this episode to change, like having her eavesdrop as a door, I don't think that's enough, so just cut that, and instead just have her consider giving Aang up. Consider giving in to the Fire Nation here. She doesn't need to say that, but just have her pause like she's considering what Zuko says, hesitating. And now, in that moment, let Suki cut in and say, no, we're not giving Aang up. We will fight if we have to. Give Suki that moment, and give Sokka a moment to back her up as well. Yeah, first time round, Suki wouldn't speak out when she disagreed with her mum. This time she does, and a fight ensues. I've made a bit of effort to stress that Zuko is panicked and feels rushed that Zhao is heading this way and might catch up. I think that panic then needs to build into something, and this seems so obvious a chance in the story for Zuko to really show some villainy, some destruction, some rage. I think either deliberately or just out of his recklessness during the fight. He causes homes to start burning. Perhaps even when he sees Zhao has reached the islands, that makes him panic and become more reckless, and yeah, I think it is super important for Zuko's later arc in this entire show that he does actually get to feel like a villain in the story right now. This is a good way to do that, and when you feel his panic and stress, the motives behind it make a lot of sense. You know, we're told a lot in this show that he needs to capture the Avatar because he wants to win his father's approval back, but actually seeing Zuko be ruthless and desperate and go to extreme ends to try and achieve that, this is what really makes us feel just how desperate he is, you know, much more than words and speeches. We obviously still cut to moments of Aang with Kyoshi or to Katara, but at some point Zhao does need to arrive on the island, and Zuko needs to see the shrine, perhaps even see it's glowing, and for him to realise that's where Aang probably is, so he breaks away to head there and he sees Katara. She fights Zuko using her new move she's learned. It works at first, but then Zuko mocks her. Does she really think one simple move is enough to stop him? He's been training his entire life. He easily knocks her aside, he's ready to take Aang. The villagers are now also being defeated since Zhao's reinforcements. Yukari is desperately calling for the very avatar she was trying to turn in. Now, outbursts Kyoshi. Now the day is saved, she does everything and the villains are sent running. Kyoshi does everything for Aang, but then what does Aang feel? Where's his action, his conclusion? We are missing an extra beat. And okay, my example version for how to fix this, I think I possibly just got a bit lazy here and thought about what the original show did, so this might not be the best suggestion. I'd be interested if anyone has any others, but I think both as a mixture of the hell Kyoshi unleashes and Zuko's recklessness, we are now left with a town that is ablaze. Kyoshi could have put the fire out herself, sure, but she represents fighting here in this episode. I think leave it all in chaos, despite the Fire Nation retreating, and let Aang be the one to resolve this problem. Fighting might be necessary, but so is restoration, healing, whatever the word might be. The idea being that his powers don't just have to cause destruction. He recognises that they can also do the opposite. So he attempts to put out the fires. And, contrived as it might be, we do also need the whole conflict about Aang avoiding his training to reach a conclusion. As I imagine it, Katara is doing a decent job waterbending to put out some of these fires, but it's still quite slow. This is the moment Aang wants to learn. You know, airbending the fires kinda works, but it can also be quite dangerous in spreading the flames even more, so he asks Katara to show him how she's doing that. What is this move that's making the water? He copies it, he starts to learn. Now Aang is waterbending, but with much more power than Katara, and brilliantly they put out the flames. Sokka can then come up and goofily exclaim about how amazing Aang was there as the Avatar. All the badass stuff we did with Kyoshi, Aang can really fight the Fire Nation, he can really make a difference, Sokka is buying into it now, and Aang can make the point that, yeah, that's true, but he also realises his power doesn't necessarily have to be destructive either. He doesn't need to be so afraid of what he can do. Job done. Sokka can kiss Suki, Yukari can praise Aang, both Katara and Aang can talk about the need to find a waterbending master now, because A, Katara recognises how dangerous the Fire Nation are and just how much stronger she needs to be to stand a chance against someone like Zuko, and B, Aang has realised he doesn't need to be as afraid of his power. That's it, that's more of a conclusion to their arcs. As I say, I'm not convinced I've done that ending as neatly as it could be. You could definitely do more. You know, the runtime of this episode is only about 48 minutes. I've cut a lot out, so there is space to expand and write something a bit more expansive that can do this better. But generally, I think I've set out a decent idea of the sort of things that need fixing. The only other thing is this scene where Zhao basically suggests he and Zuko should combine forces, even naming Zuko in charge, but it feels like he's up to something suspicious. What might that be? You then immediately see exactly what that is, because he sends this letter to Ozai. I personally would prefer him not sending the letter, and just ends this scene with much more emphasis on Zuko being suspicious of him. What is Zhao up to? What's going on here? I, as the audience, am intrigued to find out. That said, if you don't send a letter to Ozai, that does make it a bit harder to pull Ozai into the next episode of the show, so I'm not sure. I'll just ask what you think and let you sort that bit out for me. Generally, that's this video. I did want to talk about other little bits that I quite liked from this episode, or other little bits I wanted to change, but this has gotten very long already. I hope it's been interesting. I don't know, I just hope these videos don't come across like me going, look how much better my ideas are. Because my examples very much might have their own problems. Sometimes ones you can't even see until you've actually written it as a proper script. I don't know. It's very easy to make them look good when I'm sitting here explaining why these changes are necessary, but maybe this isn't the correct solution. Maybe I'm an idiot. They are more just an example for ways you could try to approach fixing the problems and strengthening what is already a decent episode. So let me know what you think. Comment all of your thoughts. Subscribe and check out my other Avatar videos. There's a whole playlist. Maybe even support me on Patreon, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time.
And as ever, a special thank you goes to Grace, Luke Orr, Treat Ukeba, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Samara Salsey, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.